Revolution, a leader overthrown, and now, a death sentence. In Bangladesh, a political drama has unfolded with honestly breathtaking speed. It all culminated in a verdict that has shaken not just the nation, but its neighbors too. So, let's unpack how we even got here.
Yeah, and one expert from the Atlantic Council put it perfectly, calling this a deeply polarizing moment in the country's violent political trajectory. And that's really the key thing to grasp. This isn't just about one leader's fall from power, it's a symptom of these really old, deep historical wounds and societal fractures that are now just completely wide open, leaving the country's future very much in question.
And right at the heart of it all is this: a leader who ruled for 15 years is now sentenced to death in absentia. I mean, the verdict itself is a total bombshell. But the real story, the one we need to understand, is the incredible chain of events that even made something like this possible.
All right, so to really get a handle on what's happening now, we have to start with the verdict itself. It's pretty much the climax of a story that, like I said, unfolded at lightning speed.
So let's break it down. The charge is pretty direct. The International Crimes Tribunal in Dhaka held Sheikh Hasina responsible for that lethal crackdown on student protests back in July 2024. The sentence? The maximum possible: death. But here's the critical part. She wasn't even in the courtroom. She was already in exile over in India, which is why this was a sentence in absentia.
Okay, so that verdict is definitely the end of one chapter. But it really makes you stop and ask the real question, right? How on earth does a government that seemed so entrenched, so powerful for a decade and a half, just completely unravel in this space of a few weeks?
Well, the answer starts with a student movement that just spiraled out of control and became what everyone is now calling the July Revolution.
And the speed at which this all happened is just wow. A protest over job quotas in June quickly ignited in July after a really controversial comment from the Prime Minister. The government's response was a violent crackdown, the July massacre. But instead of crushing the movement, it just supercharged it. By early August, the whole country was paralyzed, and by August 5th, it was all over. Sheikh Hasina had resigned and fled, just like that.
Now, to really understand that turning point, you have to get the significance of the word Razakar. This is a deeply, deeply painful term in Bangladesh, referring to collaborators from the 1971 Independence War. So when Sheikh Hasina used it to try and demean protesters, they didn't back down. They co-opted it. Their chants of "We are Razakars" became this incredible, ironic act of defiance that completely flipped the government's narrative on its head.
But the government's response was, well, it was anything but ironic. It was just brutal. The United Nations Human Rights Office has since estimated a staggering death toll, over 1,400 people killed during the violence.
And this wasn't just a number. It was a tragedy, with real faces, real names. Victims included students like Abu Sayyid, one of the very first to be killed, and 16-year-old Ghulam Nafiz. An image of him being rushed to a hospital just went viral, and it galvanized the entire movement. These deaths are what transformed a protest into a full-blown revolution.
So with Hasina fleeing the country, this crisis immediately became an international one, and it landed squarely on the doorstep of its giant neighbor, India.
And this puts India in an incredibly tricky spot. On one hand, you've got loyalty. Sheikh Hasina was a key ally, and India is very unlikely to extradite her after a trial it sees as flawed. But on the other hand, there's pure pragmatism. India has huge trade and security interests in Bangladesh that depend on a working relationship with the new government. Sheltering Hasina risks that relationship, forcing New Delhi to perform this really delicate geopolitical balancing act.
Meanwhile, back inside Bangladesh, this death sentence didn't really bring any closure. If anything, it seems like it's just carved the nation's existing fractures even deeper.
You see, for a significant part of the population, this verdict represents justice. Long overdue. They see it as the necessary conclusion to a 15-year rule they felt had become more and more authoritarian, arguing it's the only way to get real accountability for the crackdown and all the lives lost.
But then, there's another, equally passionate viewpoint. A lot of people worry that a death sentence isn't justice at all, it's vengeance. They argue that all it's going to do is harden political divisions and make that desperately needed process of national reconciliation completely impossible. And what's fueling this whole debate are some really serious questions about the trial itself. I mean, you have human rights groups like Amnesty International pointing to its incredible speed, The fact that it was held in absentia, with no defense team for Hasina, has raised major red flags about due process. On top of that, critics are also pointing to legal changes the interim government made, and to allegedly political appointments to the tribunal, all of which, for many observers, casts a real shadow on how impartial this verdict really was.
So where does all of this leave Bangladesh? Well, the country is at a critical crossroads, really facing a deeply uncertain future.
Okay, so there's an interim government in place, and we've got elections on the horizon for February. But here's the catch. The Awami League, that's Hasina's party, a massive political force in the country, has been banned from participating. So trying to create a stable, inclusive political landscape is going to be an immense challenge.
Ultimately, the events of this past year have forced Bangladesh to make a fundamental choice. Will the path forward be one of accountability that finally leads to reconciliation? Or will it become a cycle of retribution that just deepens the country's divisions for a generation to come? Really, the nation's entire future hinges on the answer.